Wow. The things that you learn on the road. I've got a public service announcement before we start with today's slightly delayed Sunday with Charles. Apple has introduced a bizarre new feature where if you have multiple computers in the same room, they automatically link to each other in a way that severely disrupted today's operation. But we are back online, and we have special guest Bob Bishop with us today. Bob, how are you? Charles is with us as well.
I'm doing fine, Jason. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to be here,
Thank you
Jason.
for your patience.
We should make sure we show people that wonderful poster that your people in the art department came up with.
Yes, thank you, Charles. And thank you for your patience, Charles. This was a very difficult problem to resolve. And you guys don't have the same access to the screen share that we would in the New York studio, but the audience is seeing this poster. And Charles, do you want to explain anything about why we have Bob pictured in this way and what the...
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Most people, to the extent they have personal experience with accountants, it's with if they are in a position where they want this, it's where they have an accountant to work with them on their personal tax returns. And so most people are shaped by that experience and don't necessarily understand the vital role that truly independent accounting firms play and the raft of regulations that are involved when a CPA firm that is licensed in a state affixes its name to a piece of paper alleging that it is a truly independent audit. You can't just get any schlump to do that. And it's actually a pretty serious set of violations when a crooked management team, which I allege, and you guys don't have to have an opinion on this, that the Clinton Foundation has been crooked from the jump. It's crooked 24/7, and it's crooked right now. When you go and procure the services of an accounting firm to fool the public and issue a set of financial statements that purport to be audited, you're going to fool a lot of people. And a case in point is the Pulitzer Prize winning, I'll use the phrase again, schlub, suppose I should use the phrase schmuck, who got Trump's tax returns and made a big deal of those in the 2015-16 timeframe, David K. Johnson. I spoke to him about the Clinton Foundation, and in a sense, this presentation is meant to go to him because he dismissed my concerns by saying, I'm not an accountant. And I tried to explain to him that I have a lot of experience working with accountants on countless transactions around the planet. And while I may not be an accountant, and while I may not be technically qualified, some would say that I'm pretty good with numbers and I'm pretty good sussing out fraud. So this was an idea we had brewing for some time. Bob Bishop will be too modest, which is part of his charm, in explaining his qualifications, but he has decades of experience as an actual, legitimate, careful, independently certified CPA. He's worked both as an accountant and in business, and he has spent a tremendous amount of time going through the financial statements and the legal status with others of the apparent legal status. And this is his moment to explain something that we could not explain until now. So Bob is coming in much, if you've seen the movie The Accountant, it's a fantastic movie, a little bit too much gratuitous violence, but it's actually very fast paced and the good guys win in the end, which I like to see. And we thought it would be a great idea to feature Bob as this accountant and let Bob have the bulk of this show to tell us and tell the world what he has been sitting on, what he's done, and what his conclusion is about, what his conclusions are about the state of the accounting profession and its failures alongside political hacks in both parties to so far bring the Clinton Foundation and other crooked foundations to the justice they actually deserve, which should involve prison time. So with that preamble, Bob, I turn the floor to you.
Thank you. One of the things I believe in is transparency, and in that poster, I have neither an AR-15 or an AK-47. So just for the sake of transparency. But anyhow, what I want to do is I want to give a little background before we get into the disciplinary action that the state of Arkansas took against the Clinton Foundation auditor. Back in around 2018, I caught Charles and Jason show where Charles was talking about BKD. And he kept saying, I don't understand how they could issue an audit opinion and sign off on the tax returns. And I thought, well, that's an interesting topic. Let me look into it. And I had earlier retired, so I had plenty of time and started digging into it. So the first thing I did was go to the Arkansas board, and I went and looked at their registration and found out that BKD was registered in 2003. Well, what is interesting is that for over 2 years, they were unlawfully practicing accounting, including the Clinton Foundation engagement, which told me there was a lot of sloppiness. And then I started doing a triangulation between the annual report, the tax returns, and the audited financial statements. I couldn't make sense of it. Nothing tied. I got to 2005, where the library, where they came off a non-GAAP financial statement called a modified cash, which I've never heard of getting an audit opinion that was clean on. So I reached out to Charles and wrote an email and said, Charles, the best way to tackle the Clinton Foundation is to go through a complaint with the Arkansas Accountancy Board. We had 2 other options, which is criminal as well as civil, but neither of those are going to work, obviously. So Charles hooked me up with another CPA that had contacted him that had come up with the same realization, who had a background in tax and nonprofits. So we got together, put our heads together, and looked at how are we going to file a complaint with the Arkansas Accountancy Board. And we went through year by year, all the way to the point where into PwC and Cohen Resnick, we decided that BKD was the one to do. And in 2011, we tackled the tax return. In 2011, what happened is there was a lot of issues, and then Hillary was running for presidency in late 2015, and Charles, I know, was putting a lot of pressure with Jerry Coursey on the tax returns. They went through and amended the tax returns. So under the Arkansas statutes, we had 3 years window to file a complaint, and the months were running out within that 3-year time window. So what we did is we filed within a week putting it together, but we made sure that the package arrived during a board meeting for the drama of it. And as a result of that, then we went through several other hoops. They sent me an acknowledgement letter. They gave it to BKD. I went back to the board and said, hey, there's 59 allegations that are itemized that I didn't put in the report. They gave that to BKD. BKD responded within 5 weeks. I got the chance to do a rebuttal that was scathing. Then we went through interrogatories. Then we went through expert witness. And then ultimately in April of 2021, almost 3 years later, there was a consent order filed on BKD by the Accountancy Board. So what we want to do today is we want to go through the 6 major items that led to that. And I want to start out first, and then Charles can join me on this, is the Simpson-Thatcher governance review that was done in December of 2011. And in that—
Just briefly, Bob, before we go there, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I want to make sure that people watching know that they can subscribe to your YouTube channel. You've been with us before. People who are seeing you for the first time, you've done a ton of work down at the border with George Rodriguez, and we're also simulcasting today's show. There's I apologize for this mistake among the others, but the wrong thumbnail. But we've got a simulcast of the video on the Bob Bishop YouTube channel, and I really encourage Crowdsource the Truth viewers to subscribe to this channel and go through the numerous videos that Bob has put there. There's going to be a lot more coming.
Thank you. Getting back to the Simpson-Thatcher memo, this was a governance review that was put together primarily by Chelsea Clinton, who was in a dispute with Doug Band. So I've highlighted some of the items in here in the document. It's off WikiLeaks, which is available to anybody. But the problem of it is there was no governance. The accounting records were in shambles. There weren't any controls. And tied in with this, we also looked at the board report of 2012, which is almost a year later, where they had a government audit, an A133, that was done in 2011. And BKD in that spelled out there were serious deficiencies in the accounting controls as well as the board minutes. So at the end of the day, BKD knew there were issues with the financials, with the operations. They were working in Excel spreadsheets. There were no approvals. They didn't have the standard architecture that you would have in such a large nonprofit. And they should have known better having the Clinton Foundation as a client. For me, I would have been I'd have been to the point I'd want to drop the Clinton Foundation because of the risk that it took. And I'm sure Charles can add a few things to it as well.
Sure. Jason, if you could put that Simpson-Thatcher memo back up there, that I don't think is a Simpson-Thatcher memo, but
There you go.
no problem. So this is significant for, take kind of an extremely high level approach on this. People who've been watching the show know that my first full-time job was actually at Simpson-Thatcher. And what I was doing when I was 18 years old, for the summer of 1974, between high school and college, I was a proofreader. And I was trained in that summer to be very cautious, something that John Podesta, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Chelsea Clinton are not. So Bob is putting up here what he found using the correct name of the Simpson-Thatcher firm. But if you go into that Podesta WikiLeaks thing and put in Simpson-Thatcher, THATCHER, in the search term, which is not the correct name, you'll get to an earlier version of this memo, which is very, very provocative. And the reason is, several days before December 3rd, 2011, the Simpson-Thatcher team agreed to go to Chappaqua and give an oral report before this written report was issued. And there are differences between the oral report, I surmise, and the written report. I think the oral report was probably, holy fucking shit, guys, there's no foundation here. You don't have any bylaws. You don't have any articles of incorporation. You've been operating in New York since 1998. You never filed for permission to operate in New York with the Secretary of State, nor did you get doing business as name authority. And we can't understand why you're doing anything other than being a presidential library and archive in Little Rock. We don't understand what you're doing in New York. We don't understand what you're doing around the world. We don't understand what BKD has been doing, because evidently they haven't checked anything. And oh, by the way, there is no such entity on December 3rd, 2011, called the William J. Clinton Foundation, lowercase the. There is no such entity. So that's just a high level approach. And I know from long ago dealing with Simpson-Thatcher as an employee, but in more recent time, working with them on deals, this is a top law firm. And Victoria Bjorklund, who's one of the authors of this memo, was one of the experts in the world who co-authored a textbook called New York State Nonprofit Corporation Law, which Jason has, I think, a copy of, and can vouch for the fact that it's extensive. So this team had to have known December 3rd, 2011, that they had a major league lemon on their hands. And they must have known, because they're very politically active, the Simpson-Thatcher people, as Democrats predominantly, they must have known that this was a serious problem for the Obama people, for Hillary's ultimate chances to run for president, if that's what she wanted to do. And they also, the FBI that has started an investigation in January 2016 into the Clinton Foundation, they either just said, you know what, we're not going to investigate. We don't investigate Democrats. We only investigate conservatives. We don't investigate globalists, only nationalists. Either the FBI just said, F this, we don't care, or there's a record in the files that real FBI agents who wanted to redeem themselves could find of whether the FBI was blocked from going back into this important time frame, which is crucial to understand, because you can't pick up the financials of the Clinton Foundation in 2016 without understanding the history going back, frankly, to October 3rd, 23rd, 1997. So sorry, that's a quick overview.
Yeah, one of the things I want to add in the memo, they talk about them risking their tax exemption. That was one of their conclusions. So a lot of this information that Simpson-Thatcher had, BKD had rights to in conducting it. So the first thing you do as an auditor is what type of legal entity am I auditing? I don't think they knew. So before we go on to the second topic, I want to mention that in the reply by BKD, they used a pejorative term that I was a conspiracy theorist. Now, one of the
About
things that
you?
was, yeah, about me, but what's interesting, Jason, is they also get a veiled threat that I could be subject to disciplinary action by the AICPA. Well, one of the interesting aspects about that is the chief operating officer, Eric Hansen, at the time was the AICPA chairman-elect into 2019. So basically, that was a veiled threat, not only at me, but at the Arkansas Accountancy Board.
Is that bad?
Isn't that crazy? He's like a mob boss.
Well,
He's saying if you investigate us, we'll
Yeah.
nail you.
Well, if you look at that one thing on the AICPA Accountancy Journal, look at the topic. It says, "We must be bold."
I think
Yeah.
actually it originally said we must be bullshit artists.
Or we have, yeah.
Yeah.
But
He
Bob,
forgot his tiger, Bob.
but Bob, just a little bit. The audience may not be as familiar with some of the things that you're going very quickly through, which is great. But one of the things I think is very important that you might spend a little bit of time on is that in the accounting profession, especially, accountants are trained to sniff out fraud. It's not necessarily their responsibility to find the actual fraud, but they have to opine as to whether the statements are free from material misstatement, which is
Correct.
basically fraud. And so the way I understand the process of complaining about financial statements occurs is that when somebody makes a valid complaint, it is absolutely not the right response to demonize the person bringing the complaint to the attention of the board in the way that they did demonize or tried to demonize you. So this is reprehensible behavior, frankly.
Yeah.
The reaction is reprehensible.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
hallmark is professional skepticism, right? That's what makes accountants supposedly special when they do their work. If there's no skepticism, is there really objectivity? No, not at all. And that was the problem that BKD had. They were not independent, they were not objective, and that's a serious issue. What I want to do is,
But Bob, just quickly, it does sound like they were the right accountants for the Clintons, because their response to you is, if you investigate anything, we're going to take an official disciplinary action against you, irrespective of the veracity of your evidence.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's how they roll.
Nice
Yeah.
guys.
So the next thing I want us to look at is the Donna Shalala memo in 2015, when they went in and redid the tax returns for slight immaterial differences. And
Not this management letter?
no.
Okay.
What is the title of that Donna Shalala letter?
Well, it
You get
should be,
Oh, redacted?
nope, that's not it. If we went to the Clinton Foundation's website and went about and looked at the financial statements, we'll go open it from there, Jason.
Yeah, it's a we've done it before. It's the letter to their supporters or something from Donna Shalala in 2015 saying, in essence, don't worry, we've got this under control. This is minor. And then there's a supporting letter from the law firm, or ostensibly from the law firm, the fact sheet.
So
You
where
remember
will I
that?
find that?
Oh, it's under about. Go to about, there you go. Go to the bottom and you should see,
Financials.
nope.
I think isn't it financials, Bob?
There you go, reports and financials at the very top, Jason, up there in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
And
And down the page.
Yeah, down the page. I think you're going to have to scroll up, Jason.
Recognizing our generous sponsors.
No.
What's the
Well, keep scrolling up. You're up higher, and look
state
for
registration tax?
That's it. No, further higher. Further higher.
Determination letter. Clinton Foundation 1023, IRS
Nope.
determination letter.
Nope. Keep going.
Letter, President Donna Shalala to supporters.
Yep.
There you go. Okay, there we are.
So if we open that up where the audience can see it, and then we scroll down to those bullet points in the middle of it, she's saying right there that the review found several errors, but our external tax reviewers informed us that the errors did not require us to amend the returns. There's no changes in our numbers, essentially. Well, when I looked at the accounting expenses for 2015, they were $2.7 million. That set off an alarm to me. That says that there's something going on when they amended these tax returns. So what I did is I took 2010, 2011, and 2012, and I compared the original tax return to the amended tax return. And in doing that, I found substantial changes. Now, what those substantial changes mean is they probably should have reissued the audited financial statements, or BKD pull its opinion. And you should have a PDF that I provided to you, Jason, that has the marked up 2011 tax returns for the audience to see.
Yes.
Okay, so I highlighted everything in yellow. So if you go look up at that right-hand corner, it says gross receipts, look at my comment.
This?
Yeah, but it should pop up my comment over there on the right. It's like 65 million was the gross receipts. And as you go through the whole tax return, it's marked up with over 200 different items where there were changes that were material. So one of the fields was off by $100 million. If you look right there at the left where it says amended return versus the current year, those are totals that were in the amended return. So you see 65 million right there for grants, but over in the current year in the original says 56 million. These are not small immaterial changes. These are changes they had to do to materially file the tax returns correct for 2010, 2011, and 2012.
To attempt to file them correctly. They're still not correct.
Correct. And one of the things that happened is PwC took over in 2013. They spent a year, and evidently with Hillary running for president, as well as PwC now realizing they've got a holy mess on their hands. So I think they did 2014 and then dropped out, and Cohen-Resnick then stepped into the bucket. But there's obviously very serious issues with the financial statements, and this is an indication of the sloppiness that BKD had.
Well, and you know, you are not a conspiracy theorist, and the Clintons, nor is Jason, nor am I. The Clintons are, that's a term that Hillary popularized back in Bill's first presidential campaign. Everybody making criticism of Bill and Hillary were conspiracy theorists, members of a vast right-wing conspiracy. If you go back, Jason, to that about page and you look at the second thing after Donna Shalala, there's a fact sheet where now the audience has seen a glimpse in it. In the fullness of time, they can look at these documents on their own. They can see that the difference between the originally issued financial statement and the amended one is so great that had I gotten that information, had I been a trustee, I would have fired everybody in management. I would have fired the accounting firm. I would have, thought through, do I go and beg for mercy at the IRS? Because it's very clear that this thing was completely out of control. And it's also clear that the attempted changes didn't fix the problem, because the entity that's listed on this amended return that's not the real name of the entity to begin with. There is no entity, I would argue, from a legal standpoint. And I'm not a lawyer, but just that's my view. Do you have that thing, Jason?
Which thing? This is it. I'm pretty sure this is it. This is the.
Yeah, it looks like it.
This was amended returns This
Yeah.
is the report.
Oh, yeah. See, this is not really a report. So when I get a report from a Simpson Thatcher, you saw that its name was on that draft report. There is no. This isn't a memo from what's the name of the law firm? DLA Piper. This is a Clinton Foundation characterization of what this person, who was the Assistant Attorney General in the tax division of the U.S. Department of Justice, when the U.S. Department of Justice, after the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI failed to find the frauds at the Clinton Foundation in the first place. This is the last person I would trust. Before we get into the issue of the many conflicts between DLA and the Clinton family, the fact that DLA and the Clinton family were working together in laureate education, that Bill and Hillary were pulling down ultimately $17.6 million personally for a no-show job that Bill had as basically chairman emeritus or honorary chairman of this for-profit publicly traded pile of garbage. So this is not.
Charles, back up half a step. We're losing you on camera. Just back up a little bit. There we go.
Sorry. So this is an attempt. This is I would say a crucial piece of evidence. This is the Clinton Foundation conspiring to pass off potential legal arguments, maybe made by Kathy Keneally, who's the lawyer in question, independently, maybe not made by DLA Piper. You look at the italicized paragraph above, if you can just go back up a little bit. In my experience, a law firm, they may do tentative analysis, but nobody says this quote is attributable to Kathy Keneally. It's also attributable potentially to Evel Knievel. I mean, this is not DLA Piper saying, we have reviewed BKD's work, we've checked Simpson Thatcher's work, gone to the source documents. No, this is passed off as potentially work by DLA Piper. And again, if I were the FBI and a real Justice Department, I'd be going into this and I'd be saying, forget attorney-client privilege. You don't have attorney-client privilege as a co-conspirator in a fraud and an ongoing attempt to cover up this fraud. You don't have that. You lost the attorney-client privilege. Ask Donald Trump about that.
One of the things that led to all this is an individual named Andrew Kessel. Andrew Kessel was the CFO till last year. One of the things about Andrew Kessel is he was never a professionally trained accountant, nor educated as one. So it raises the question, who prepared the financial statements?
Right.
Well, it turned out we got a copy of the management representation letter from the Clinton Foundation that said that BKD prepared the financial statements.
Well, explain the significance of that, Bob.
Well, you got to be independent, you got to be objective. And if you're preparing the work and auditing the work, how could you be that? You could not be objective, you could not be independent. And as large as the Clinton Foundation was, they should have hired a professional CPA, CFO, and controller, which they did not do. And that is a major risk that BKD should have put in to their risk assessment. There's a number of risk assessments that you have to do according to the accounting standards, which apparently BKD never did, from what I can see, based on it. And there's a copy of the PDF, I think that I gave you, of the management letter, Jason, that you can open up.
That's the one that stated that you opened before we got into this. It's on the letterhead of William J. Clinton Foundation, addressed to the Clinton Foundation.
Should be on the far left, not that one.
There we go. Yeah, we got it.
Okay, so if you scroll down, you'll see very clearly, I marked up in yellow, it says that BKD prepared the financial statements. Now, the problem that BKD had when they were trying to do this, they were operating in Excel spreadsheets according to their own government audit that they did of the Clinton Foundation. Who could do a financial system on Excel spreadsheets? You talk about the risk. Somebody fat fingering, somebody destroying the file, somebody deleting the file, changing.
How is it normally done?
Well, generally it's done in a general ledger system that you cannot touch and change. You have to do journals. The journals have to be approved, which they didn't do any of that. So when you
Wow.
look at it, that may have been the reasons why they had to go through and amend the tax returns, because there were so many different issues that they had to spend $2.7 million to recreate the financial statements, to do the tax return amendments. Big no-no, big no-no in my opinion.
And I think, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that BKD had the authority to fly around the world and look at supposed joint ventures and subsidiaries and initiatives that the Clinton Foundation was operating in different foreign currencies, in different operating environments, in countries that are even more corrupt than the United States and the state of Arkansas. So just if you're just talking consolidated numbers, this approach will catch nothing serious. But then when you think about below the level of putting it all together in one neat package, it's very clear that this was, to me anyway, as an outsider, this was an attempt to just pay these people an amount of money to produce a document that ordinary bird dogs would not sniff through and say, you know what, this is still a steaming pile of bullshit.
Yeah. A couple of things that, I raised issues on. I wrote a couple of briefs. One of the things that I tried to tackle in one of the briefs was the very issue, Charles, you said, of these foreign subsidiaries, which the Clinton Foundation never had the authority under its charter to do. One of them was called a CAISO that was in a Delaware corporation that they created. They funneled the money through a CAISO to Fondo a CAISO down in Colombia to create a subsidiary down there. And that was one of the issues. There was another one that was a Swedish Clinton Foundation that was also not picked up. So there's two that we were able to find, but I'm sure there's more. There may have been some that were, operating to your point over the years, Charles, that they never captured.
Well, yeah, and for people who are not familiar with this, right now we're living through a very volatile period where the US dollar is appreciating, soaring in value against most foreign currencies and most commodities. And in that kind of an environment, if you're a crooked accountant working with a crooked management team, you can, if you date an invoice the wrong date, you can cause people to not see the fact that the management team and maybe the accountants have been stealing money by concocting invoices that don't reflect the true value of the service or good that was purchased by the foundation, or alternatively, not reflecting the true value of a donation made to the Clinton Foundation in a foreign currency. So this to me, I mean, to call you a conspiracy theorist and let Hillary Clinton say on Friday, as she did, that Trump supporters are Nazis, I mean, it's past the point, really, of letting somebody like Hillary Clinton make an opinion on a national and a global stage without being not physically, but figuratively slapped around. People need to say to her, you've been lying your entire life. This is your foundation in the name of you, your husband, in theory, and your daughter, in theory. And you let this thing be run in the way that it has been run and is now being run for more than 20 years. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're a disgrace to philanthropy. Forget about politics. We can go into that too.
Yeah, the next item I want to get into is Unitaid. And just for a background for the viewers, Unitaid was an entity that was an initiative of the WHO that was created by Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, and President Chirac of France. A lot of the money came from France through doing what they called a micro tax, and it was on airline tickets. So there was almost $500 million that was siphoned out of that and given to the Clinton Foundation. Now, the Clinton Foundation's situation there is they were supposed to be procuring the drugs, using their political clout, and then being able to get discounts for Africa and other countries like that were developing countries. But the problem of it is there was an improper accounting for it. Under that, the money came into the Clinton Foundation's CHI, which was an initiative, the Clinton Health Access Initiative. And with that, they recorded it as revenue and in program expense. But under generally accepted accounting principles, that's an agency arrangement that should be an escrow account. and they did improper accounting. So what happened is France had some of their auditors go over to Boston and tried to audit the Clinton Health Access Initiative, the funds used by that was put in there by Unitate. They come up empty-handed. That's in a French newspaper. So what happened is in 2012 there was a change in leadership with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, and they changed auditors in the subsidiary, and it was a group called Hoffman-Meyer. So Hoffman-Meyer went in there and realized that there was a serious accounting error in how that was accounted for in Unitate, and went back and restated 2011 results, redid and amended the tax return, and then also changed the financial statements for 2011 and the comparables. But what's interesting is, with the consolidation that BKD did, they never restated the 2011 consolidated report for that accounting issue, and then didn't disclose it in the footnotes. So it was all hidden from the public. It was about a $483 million error, accounting error by BKD. That is severe. It gave the impression to the public that the Clinton Foundation was doing all these wonderful things when you look at their financial statements, when in fact, all they were was an agent for these drugs.
Well, another thing, Bob, that it did, just in my simple way of thinking, the way BKD presents its results, uncorrecting the Meyer-Hoffman material change and correct change, leaves the Clinton Foundation massive spending in a place where you compare it against a revenue level that isn't as high. It's way too high. So the spending on bullshit, travel, overhead, private planes, secretarial services, you know, fancy offices, you name it, conferences, the spending on its own is ridiculous, even in the BKD inflated version. You take these, make these changes, you take substantial revenue out, and the overhead is monstrously high. So when the Clinton Foundation likes to say that, you know, Ortel and Goodman and maybe you, Bob, are, you know, we don't understand that there are these charity rating people who give 5 stars to the Clinton Foundation, or 5 stars, the highest rating. That's because these charity rating agencies are tiny. They have a lot of clients. They're enthralled to the Clintons and the political SWAT that they have. And they too have not done their work. So this is a very important thing. One final point, when the Clinton Foundation grudgingly disclosed who their donors were, they probably didn't want the public to understand just how big Unitate was. So they set the top scale as being 25 million and up. Bob mentioned that by 2011, the total amount of spending, donations purportedly going from Unitate to the Clinton Foundation were approximately 500 million. That's 20 times the highest level cutoff. You know, and if even the New York Times, the failing New York Times, and perhaps the Wall Street Journal, if they knew back in 2011 that the World Health Organization, in which Unitate was housed, had somehow sent $500 million to a charity that had no authority to do anything outside Little Rock, even they might have asked some questions, because 500 million is much more, for example, than the issues with Uranium One, financially speaking, which are only around 150 million.
Now, you guys are being very diplomatic, keep using the term accounting errors. And I'm not trying to corner anybody into saying anything that would be construed as an allegation, but doesn't it seem implausible that a professional accounting firm could make so many egregious errors? I mean, at a certain point, doesn't it become evidence of intent?
Well, the accounting profession likes to use the term irregularities. You can have an intentional irregularity or an unintentional irregularity. I'll leave it up to the public. My assumption is those are intentional.
Right.
I agree with you.
So. And a further point, just so people understand, people may not know that around the time that Bob is talking about, well before 2011, BKD was a Missouri-based firm that illegally started practicing in Arkansas, but then was the largest accounting firm by far in Arkansas. It audited the city of Little Rock, many other institutions. And so as a guess, this firm based in Little Rock looked at the Clintons, looked at their global context and said, you know what? We do a solid for them. We can always blame these mistakes on some local accountants, say, how are we to know that some partner in Little Rock made these mistakes? But if we do them a solid, maybe we go to the Clinton Global Initiative, maybe we go fly around with Bill Clinton to Africa, maybe we get referrals for clients outside Little Rock. And I can imagine that that's the way this worked.
Little Epstein jet action in there.
Maybe some of that too.
Well, we still have.
The next thing I want to cover is the library. And I sent you a couple of links on the library. One of the things when you look at the library, it came in at 171 million. Now, one of the things you have to realize about the library is the situation that it's basically not like a standard office building. It doesn't have a lot of demising walls, a lot of cost, but it came in at over $1,300 a square foot, which is outrageous. Now, there were two comparables. If you look at the Hefner International and then you look at the Arkansas library that they did, it had the same architect. It had CDI, the Clark Development building. Yeah. So they came in at under 250 million square a foot. They were very comparable in the construction. So the problem that I had with it, looking at it, is how did you get that kind of cost overrun? They filed with the city of Arkansas for the permits at 85 million, and you come in at 171 million. What kind of accounting is that? To me, it smells like there's irregularities going on.
It smells like they needed 71 million.
Yeah, maybe Hillary did. You had to run for
or 86 million.
Yeah. But if you look at those two facilities, you just go like, how could you ever come in that high? It just doesn't make sense.
And on that one, when I got into this, after it became clear that Donald Trump was going to run, Donald Trump is being raked over the coals in New York State by this Tish James for inflating the value of the supposed values of the many buildings that he has interest in here in New York State. I mean, this was the most significant and the most expensive construction project in Little Rock at the time in 2004. When you talk $1,300 a square foot for not a complicated entity, today that's a lot of money, but back in 2004, it's ridiculous.
Let's talk for a minute if we can. I don't mean to derail, but this Letitia James thing, I mean, why wouldn't she just bring a criminal charge if there's evidence of criminal fraud? And conversely, why, if someone was defrauded by Trump, why aren't they suing him? It seems a bizarre case. Is there anything else like this that's happened in history?
Is there an election imminent in New York?
I mean, I know why she's doing it. I'm just saying, maybe, Bob, are you aware of any attorney general ever?
I've kind of followed the case, but if you really think about it, shouldn't the banks who made those loans file a complaint, not her? Right. If the banks are damaged and evidently they haven't had any collateral damage issues, the loans are current, how could you file a complaint? If they incurred financial losses, haven't been a banker for the first part of my career, yeah, you've got an issue, possibly criminal. But at this point, if the loans are current and the banks aren't complaining, what standing does she have? I don't think she's got any.
It's bizarre.
As is she.
Lawfare. Well, but I mean, it just speaks to everything that's going on here. We have to obviously be diplomatic and cautious in referring to irregularities, but this is yet another perhaps legal irregularity. I mean, again, we're having one of the most, if not the most historic crime wave in New York City, and Letitia James is bringing action against Donald Trump for, as Bob said, I mean, it seems to me, Charles, if I want to sell you my car, I think it's worth $1 million. If you want to buy it, it's $5. And that's how a negotiation works, isn't it?
Well, you can't withhold material information from it. Yeah. But yeah, it's a negotiating session. But let's let Bob, because he's on a tear. Let him continue.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next topic I want to go to, and this is dear to Charles's heart, is the dual test. Are you organized and do you operate as your charter and the articles of incorporation. And Charles has made this case over and over for the last 3 or 4 years. And I've reached the conclusion and pushed the board on it that this is not a nonprofit. In fact, if anything, it should have been taxed by the federal income tax as well as various state income taxes.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's not really a charity. In fact, I don't even know what it is, other than it's a slush fund for the Clinton Foundation.
And
for the Clinton family, yeah, it's a perpetual grifting machine. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of examples that we can find, even in what I believe today is the crooked IRS, of past cases where the IRS, for far simpler situations, even involving, in some cases, politically connected people, throws the book at entities that try this garbage. I mean, when you look at the initial years of the Clinton Foundation, and let's leave aside 97, the partial year, where they didn't file a tax return, which I would argue, or tax informational return, which is a serious problem, I think. The travel expenses were tiny. Bill then leaves, and he ain't flying in Delta Airlines in the back, and so the Clinton family gets to say that when they get involved with the Clinton Foundation, ostensible good work beginning in 2002 around Africa and elsewhere, private jets are required, and penthouse suites are required, and fancy banquets are required. And if this were not a true charity, then the way this would work is that the provision, the gifts and emoluments that the Clinton family got would be taxed. And then you would have a discussion about whether it was really appropriate, even for the former president of the United States, to be flying private to Africa in a charity. You'd have a discussion about that. And you would also, the Clintons are bona fide residents of two of I think the three most highest tax locations in the United States, Washington, D.C. and New York State. They're strict, for most people, Trump's dealing with it, strict requirements about declaring all your income and then only deducting as business expenses, validly claimed business expenses. And I would argue the Clinton case alone is a place where we don't need 187,000 new IRS agents, but if we just had 10 decent ones, they would more than pay for themselves just looking at the Clinton Foundation. If you stick 100 on the Clinton Foundation and its donors, you could probably defray a significant percentage of the IRS total budget for a number of years, going after people like Bill Gates and a lot of other people for sending money towards the Clinton family, the notoriously suspicious grifter family, and not checking at all to see where that money went. But, oh, by the way, benefiting to the extent Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and others connected to them can pave the way for people like Bill Gates and other donors to do projects around the world under the protection of the globalist umbrella, which, because of Bill Clinton, won't prosecute them.
Well, I'll tell you, I think you and Bob could do a lot more than even 87,000 IRS agents.
Well, all you'd have to do is just go look at the articles of incorporation and compare it to what they're operating, and it's a simple test. And that's the whole about the dual test that's done.
Well, and to do it rigorously, I know that years ago Simpson Thatcher did this, and I know in the corporate section they're very careful. One of the early things that lawyers do when they start out in summer jobs and early days as associates, well before becoming partners, is they trace the corporate history, the evolution of a corporation, to make sure that at all times the thing was lawfully organized and lawfully operated in every legal jurisdiction where it either operated or solicited funds. This is something that the Simpson Thatcher firm is expert at doing. And they are expert, they almost wrote the New York nonprofit corporation law, so they certainly understand that and the precedents. This thing, there is, after April, I was just looking at this yesterday, after April 25th, 2005, no corporate actions dealing with the name changes, the expansion of their operations were validly affected by the Board of Trustees because they didn't have bylaws until November 10th, November 2nd, 2013 for this entity. So long period to operate without bylaws, which you can't do. If you don't have bylaws, you don't have governance rules. There's no procedure to make sure that this is operating as it should. Beyond that, the articles of incorporation also, which are the ones that explain in simple terms, and again, I'm not a lawyer, lawyers explain to me that articles of incorporation, it's like a foundation, the structure of a house. It explains, what you sit upon, what you're supposed to do. And it's in black and white. And that document is in the public domain. Bylaws, on the other hand, that's how the internal people govern, the trustees, the directors, management govern the day-to-day affairs of something. Normally, it's tougher to find the bylaws. You have to be persistent. You have to go into the states. You have to push the IRS, and eventually you'll get them. But there's no requirement to publish those generally to the public. This thing, for the entire time that Hillary Clinton was a senator, for the entire time that she thought about, that she ran the Department of State, and thereafter, for the time that she sought the presidency and then has been impeding Trump and leading the charge to put him in the sewer or prison or worse, this thing has not lawfully existed, in my view. And real lawyers who are objective about this would see and have seen and have written about the fact that I am, and Bob is, and Jason is correct about this.
But yet no one acts.
Well, it's because people are lazy, I think. Too many people.
Oh, no.
In both parties.
I think it goes beyond that, Charles.
Too many people in both parties are doing this. There is a McCain Foundation. There is certainly, there are various Biden foundations. There's an Obama Foundation. There's an American Conservative Union Foundation. There are a lot of, and there's the foundation that raised money for the Iran-Contras. You think about it, we talked about this without Bob. In the business world, if you're a bunch of people, it's not your own company, but you're a bunch of shareholders. And, let's say there's one person at 30% and everybody else splits the difference. The 30% shareholders, if it's, let's say, Bob, is not going to say, you know what, Jason, why don't you just take the Unitate money and buy a whole bunch of computers and a yacht for yourself, and we won't put it into the company. That does happen. No, that does happen in the for-profit world, but not very frequently, because the people in for-profit world want to share that money for their bonuses, or if it's publicly traded, they want that money to boost the value of the share price. But if the not-for-profit world is not going to be regulated, my view is it has never properly been regulated in the globalist era, then that is a gigantic set of slush funds, not just at the Clinton Foundation. There are slush funds everywhere that people are looting.
So wouldn't you say it's more likely, Charles, that this is kind of an unspoken Washington, D.C. rule, that if you're an insider, you get a nonprofit that you can pillage, and us regular dopes can just sit around and complain about it and nobody's going to prosecute anybody?
Again, when you spend time with people across the political spectrum, and there are a lot of nonprofits that are progressive, Democrat, left-leaning, when you talk to people who have in their own lifetimes, or if they're descended from people who've been doing this for a while, and they think about this behavior, they would be aghast. This is worse than Madoff. This is worse than Enron, because you're taking money that governments and other foundations, in theory, gave to the Clinton Foundation, gave to like-minded foundations to help the most vulnerable around us, the people that progressives claim conservatives don't care about. But I think conservatives do care about them, and progressives do too. The Clinton family in particular, and now the Bush family, the Obama family, they should be ashamed of themselves for what they're doing. The amount of money they're asking for now for COVID, and they asked for AIDS and for other projects that has gone unaccounted for, is gigantic. It's in the many billions of dollars. And meanwhile, forget Trenton and Toledo and the Midwest. Los Angeles is a shithole. San Francisco is a shithole. Portland is a shithole. New York is a shithole, and on and on and on. If we had real people running the IRS and the Department of Justice, and we had special people who were trained to understand and ferret out this fraud, we would make examples of these grifters. And I'm not suggesting that we should do what they used to do when there was cruel and unusual punishment, before we separated as an independent nation, when you stole a relatively small amount of money in the United Kingdom, you might be hanged, drawn, and quartered, which,
Wow.
to be a little bit gruesome, first you're hanged, with a noose around your neck, but until you're nearly dead. Then you're drawn through the street behind a horse cart. And back in England, the streets weren't exactly smooth in this time frame. They were littered with stones and debris and horse manure and all kinds of problems. You're dragged until you're nearly dead. Then what you do is you chop that body into pieces, into 4 quarters, which hurts. And you can do that either with a sword or by taking the person and attaching that person to 2 teams of horses that go in the opposite direction and rip the body apart. Then you chop it up. And for good measure, you then take the head of the corpse, and they would stick the head on the pike of the gates of the city of London and the walls of the city of London, where it would remain until it was ultimately digested by maggots and crows and other things with the fullness of time. I'm not suggesting you do that physically, but I do think, I'm not, but I do think figuratively, people who abuse a charity in this way for this amount of time and then virtue signal around the world, calling critics of their critics conspiracy theorists and Nazis, should be ineligible to hold any responsible office, for profit, not for profit, and there should be an unbelievable audit of them. And if you can demonstrate that they stole money personally or took charity money to fund their political campaigns, all that money goes back. Penalties, interest, taxes, and if it makes them bankrupt, so be it. That's the kind of penalties that should be put in place.
Yeah, the other thing I want to add, Charles, is when you look at the risk of being audited by the IRS as a charity, it's a 99.1% chance you will never be audited. So what does that mean for the CPA profession? It means they have an extraordinary burden to do their job, which BKD didn't do on the behalf of the public. Their obligation is not to the Clinton Foundation, for example, or other auditors when they audit charities, it's to the public. And that's why it makes this case extremely important that we're making today, that the accounting profession needs to be a little bit more responsible. I'm to the point, I think we need a reformation in the accounting profession. And what I mean by that is you look at these state boards, and Arkansas had this issue too, even though they did come through with disciplining BKD. They had, for example, most of these state boards, $1 to $3 million budget. They have a staff that are really state employees that have an accounting background. But you're going up against, like, for example, Deloitte, 50 billion plus in revenue. How does a small state accountancy board discipline? Then you get into the issues of these nonprofits like the Clinton Foundation that is highly political. And then you got these state accountancy boards. Who puts the people on the boards and promotes the accounting executive? Well, it's the governor. So even to a certain extent, these accounting boards are somewhat politicized themselves. So when we're looking at being independent and objective, there needs to be a change in how we regulate the accounting profession. And I think it's desperately needed.
I couldn't agree more.
I would argue the same for the legal profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we need to do, Jason, is now show the consent order that BKD had to sign. Let's go through that.
Sure.
Now, this consent order will be available tomorrow on Gateway Pundit. Gateway Pundit is going to run an article tomorrow that I've written along with this video. And this consent order will be available for downloading, as well as the marked up tax return for 2011. But in the consent order, if we scroll down, I'll have it highlighted, or should.
There we go.
So
is that it? Respondent understands and acknowledges.
Yeah, so they acknowledge it. This document, by the way, plus any of the things that went on in the complaint and the responses BKD, it is subject to the Open Records Act of Arkansas. If you want all the documents, you want the emails, all I got to do is write Jimmy Corley, that's head of the accountancy board there, and they'll send you the records. And BKD acknowledged that. So there's a lot of interesting documents in there, which we didn't cover in the show today, but those that are interested, write Jimmy Corley. He'll respond. In fact, I had to do it for some other stuff. For example, the emails I was very much interested in between the Attorney General's office and the accountancy office. And the thing that pushed this over the finish line was the marked up tax returns, how egregious they were. And the Attorney General's office agreed, and that got it over the finish line. But here, they very much reached a conclusion, said you didn't follow the standards of the accounting profession in regarding to taxes, management services, and et cetera. So they acknowledge it. The problem that I do have with it is that they never were severe enough in the penalties. All they did is acknowledge they didn't do it. And if we go to the Arkansas website for the accountancy board, I want to show you something. This information was never available to the public until today. And let's go to the board members. And they'll have the minutes under the drop down when you go to the board members there.
Right.
Click on that, not the staff, not the staff.
That's all it had.
No, it's got board members.
Calendar? That's all it has when I roll over there. Law and rules.
No, there is board members.
Let's search. There it is. Board members.
Yep, click on it.
All right.
Click on it. The minutes are underneath there. So we want to scroll down to April of 2011 to the minutes.
2011?
I mean, excuse me, I've got a brain freeze.
There we go. Board minutes.
Yeah, to 2021, April of 2021.
Here we are.
Open it.
Yeah.
Enlarge it so we can see it.
Get rid of this thing.
And we're going to go down to a section that says consent orders, and it should be 18-068 towards the bottom.
18-068.
Yeah, and it'd be towards the bottom of the minutes.
Here we are.
Yeah, you read that, it says received external complaint regarding tax services provided by licensee. The compliance committee recommends closure of this matter by consent order contingent upon receipt of money. And
wait a minute.
So
what does that indicate? Is that your complaint, Bob?
That is my complaint. That was the number that is assigned. The 28 LP is BKD.
Yeah.
But why do they want to close it?
They never made it public. They should have. You know, and here the Arkansas office is going out giving services like Charles said, to the city of Little Rock, city of Dallas, all these others. Yet here they did something that was extremely egregious that you're not even aware of it, but should be in making your decisions. Do you want them to represent you as an accounting firm?
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I think in the many states in which the Clinton Foundation ostensibly operates, the registration and reporting requirements, which you have to discuss whether agents of the foundation were ever disciplined. And this is clearly a disciplinary action that I think if New York State were doing its job, and certain other states that are very vigilant about this were doing their job. For example, West Virginia, people make fun of West Virginia as being, simple people. They don't take they're one of the very few states that has actually disciplined the Clinton Foundation early on, going way back when. Another one that people make fun of is Mississippi. That's another state that has disciplined the Clinton Foundation. And yet these highfalutin know-it-all states, New York, California, Florida, Illinois, et cetera, they just say, never mind.
Well, let's go visit Operation Hope. It's tied in with the Clinton Foundation.
Sure.
Let's open up that link I sent you. One of the things that caught my eye, thanks to Charles, is in the Book of Giving by Bill Clinton. There was a guy called John Hope Bryant. And so Charles brought that to my attention. So I looked at it, and within 10 minutes, I know they had egregious accounting from the standpoint of the audited financial statements and the tax return. So I filed a complaint with the California Accountancy Board, and they due process. They brought the accounting firm that represented Operation Hope in front of the technical committee. And because it was so egregious, not to the extent that the BKD and the Clinton Foundation was, and they turned around and pulled their audited financial statements, and the tax return had to be done. So there is, a precedence that BKD could have done the same thing that the California Accountancy Board did with Operation Hope. Now, one of the things that you'll find in one of the people that's on the board is Chelsea Clinton.
Of Operation.
On Operation Hope.
Right.
So if you go board leadership, there you go, scroll down, you'll see, keep going. It's Global Advisors. There she is.
There
right
she is.
Yep. So what is interesting is once they did that, that was open season for me to file a complaint with the Department of Justice and the Commerce Department on the government grants that Operation Hope had received for $1.5 million. There was a criminal investigator put on my complaint by the Department of Justice, and they went through and did a thorough scrub down of what was going on, and they found two things tied in with Operation Hope. Number one, Operation Hope was never compliant on its grant reporting to the Department of Justice and the Commerce Department. Number two, they found irregularities in the grant-making process in the federal government. Now, I will mention that when I did a FOIA, nobody got indicted. But once again, it shows the importance that the accounting profession has in doing these government grant audits and the responsibility they have, not only to the IRS, but also to the government that is issuing these large grants that probably run $400 or $500 billion a year.
Right. Yeah, and you let John Hope Bryant off the hook, and next thing you get the story that appeared this weekend or the last several days of a bunch of felons in prison in Illinois getting PPE loans out of the COVID stuff while they were in prison. They got money under this program, and
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Chelsea Clinton. I give her the fact that she didn't ask to be born to Bill and Hillary, and it must have been tough to be the only child of politically active people. I'll give her that. But if you want to hold yourself out as gutsy, if you want to be collecting these sinecures around the world, if you want to hold yourself out as a charity person and a smart person and an author, you may as well actually understand the rules. And why is she the vice chair of a public charity that's not supposed to be controlled by the family? Why are Bill and Hillary, I don't know if Hillary is now, but starting in 2013, November 2nd, the people who are ostensibly running the Clinton Foundation said, you know what, we're going to concentrate control into the hands of Bill, Hillary, and make Chelsea, basically, because Bill is not a detail person. Chelsea is the person who runs the Clinton Foundation day to day in between board meetings, with her decisions not being subject to review, if you believe the filings that are in various states, including New York. It's preposterous. It's her personal, pocketbook plaything.
Yeah. The other thing I'd like to bring up on these PPP loans is, why did the charities even get any money? If you're getting government grants, you're feasting on all this money coming in, why are you entitled to a PPP loans? Now, in the situation of Operation Hope, they got like a $5 million PPP loan, which was forgiven, but it was very nice for John Hope Bryant because he took a raise of $150,000.
Isn't he a millionaire already?
Yeah, thanks for that. But he's tied in with a lot of these other individuals like the Apollo Corporation. They're doing a lot of things on housing, and it runs pretty deep on his connections. If you look at his board, you can see Tony Riesler on there.
Yeah. And again, that's another thing is, it's not like we're sitting here as Norway once was with a tiny population and $1 trillion in a sovereign wealth fund. That's not the United States right now. The United States is hemorrhaging money at government level. Individuals are suffering. Our debts are towering. And the most obnoxiously run venal group of people are the virtue signalers in government and these NGOs scooping up trillions of dollars and burning it basically and stealing what isn't burnt. And then saying the rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes. We need more money so we can steal more money and burn more money.
Yeah.
So what was the, sorry to interrupt, Bob. I'm very caught on this PPP loan to John Hope Bryant. Isn't he a Ferrari racing millionaire? Why does he get to have our tax money in the form of a forgiven loan?
Good question. I did write an article on American Thinker that addressed PPP loans to charities. In fact, I even did a drop-down spreadsheet that showed a lot of them that were getting, like, for example, Media Matters got $1.5 million.
What?
Why would Media Matters even deserve PPP loans? You had Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which got millions of dollars as well, but they were stocked to the gills and getting their fees out of the billions of dollars that Zuckerberg and them put up, for administering the foundation for donor advisories.
Holy cow.
Yeah, type in Silicon Valley.
There was more. Oh, because it's interest. So their loan was completely forgiven. This is from Bank of America, just giving money to Media Matters.
Yeah.
Well, it came from the government, though. The money that Bank of America gave to Media Matters came from the government.
It came from us, right?
Exactly. They guaranteed the loan and they forgave the loan. But if you go to Silicon Valley Foundation,
Community Foundation,
you'll see the same thing. It's absolutely abusive, in my opinion.
And you'll see the same thing in Ukraine. I mean, the grift has gone from 185 million in Little Rock up to the trillions of dollars through COVID. And who knows what's going to happen next? What we're going to be asked for and how much money is going to be stolen from everybody at a time where we're really out of money and interest rates are rising and the cost of bearing these gigantic debts is really going to cripple this economy, many households, and many people around the world. How much longer are we going to put up with this?
Yeah, Jason, I think that they got much more than 259,000 when I did some analysis.
Who runs this?
It's a gigantic. There are many foundations like this across the country, and the basic idea is that the wealthy people give money to the community foundation, and the funds are supposed to go to help worthy charities inside whatever the community is defined to be. Now, if you think about Silicon Valley, are there 6 people who are struggling in Silicon Valley? I mean, I've got to believe that, it's not like maybe, in Marin County, you've got people wandering the streets, throwing feces around the way you do in other parts of California, but I'm guessing not.
Yeah, one of the things that Silicon Valley does, and it's basically a donor advisory service. The situation with that is Zuckerberg put in $3 billion into that. So he got an immediate write-off putting in that stock.
Holy cow.
And so what happened is that money was never spent immediately. So he got an immediate tax write-off. But when you look at the tax return, you can't see where he's designating that money and who it's going to, like you would a standard family foundation. It's a way of abusing the tax code, and the IRS does nothing about it.
Who is Elizabeth Carey?
I have no clue. They have fired a number of people. They've had a lot of issues with leadership.
Well, and the Board of Trustees, though, is a who's who of people in Silicon Valley. That's the same grift that we talked about with the Gates Foundation. You take somebody who's on paper very successful, starts at Microsoft with a small amount of money, and is still sitting on a stake that's worth tens of billions of dollars. At the moment that he so generously takes Microsoft stock out of his left pocket and puts it into his right pocket at the Bill and I guess no longer Melinda Gates Foundation, he's still in control of that stock, but the IRS, back in the day when he was doing this, the Department of the Treasury cuts him a gigantic check for the value of the stock, which his foundation still controls. I just don't think you should be able to do that. If you're going to give appreciated stock away to a foundation, you should not be able to control that foundation directly or indirectly. It should be truly independent of the donor. Otherwise, it's just a charade.
Yeah, Jason, if you scroll down, look at the pages and pages of grants that go out, but you don't know who is directing those grants and how they're being paid out. It's way down there. It's like 800 pages of grants. It's insane.
Most of them are like this, across the country. They're all like this. And, nobody in the IRS, they're too busy watching porn and getting ready to audit conservatives. Nobody in the IRS is going to go and check to see whether George Soros' grant in his foundation to a tack shop, tack shop is where you buy riding clothes in Rhinebeck or outside Rhinebeck. Is that really a charity, or is that some personal expense of his family? One of his kids needs, or friends needs riding stuff. You can bury non-charitable donations in that list of grants. You can claim that grants to something like the Clinton Foundation, which doesn't exist as a charity, as a public charity, were actually made when they weren't. And again, rather than going after people who make less than 400,000 or even people who make less than 10 million, I think if you want to just enforce the laws that are on the books, forget these new ones. The way to get gold into the treasury is to go after the largest charities, including the brand name ones, Harvard, Yale, et cetera, to go hell-bent to leather into them to see where that money went. And in particular, if grants have been made to fund international projects in countries where there is no law and order, including the US, then you have to go back over that long history. And that exercise, I think, would be very good across the political spectrum and be welcomed across the political spectrum, and would help defray the ballooning and enormous cost of government at a time where we need the money.
This is staggering. So, Bob, I think we still have a few more documents, right?
I think that we've covered the topic thoroughly.
It's pretty upsetting. And I mean, it just seems like this is a badly kept secret that all of these highfalutin things, they're all tax exempt, all these think tanks, the Atlantic Council, the Brookings Institution,
the NFL,
the Emmys I've spoken about, the NFL, all of these things. And I can understand why a business association would be tax exempt, but there've got to be strict regulations on what they can do with the money. They have to stay within the context of the authorized organizational purpose, and we can't have CEOs who have privately held political motivated private companies that are benefiting from their activity, these nonprofit things. It's just outrageous, and nobody is prosecuting anything. Crime is exploding. Letitia James is after Trump. Eric Adams goes to Puerto Rico. They're asleep at the wheel.
Well, actually, let's stay in the NFL because it's game time today. There'll be a lot of games. The test for whether a charity is engaged, in the memos that I read out of the IRS, is whether, when you look at the activities, not just in the charity, but around the charity, taken together, whether the operation of the charity has generated more than insubstantial, held to be less than $1,000 over the life of the entity, private gain, meaning compensation, wealth building, et cetera, for people associated with a charity. So here you've got Roger Goodell making who knows how much money per year. You've got a whole bunch of football players making enormous salaries, but beyond them, you have the owners of these teams. In the case originally of the Dallas Cowboys, I believe that was bought long ago for $200,000. It's worth, I guess, in the billions, or a billion anyway. Can we say that the NFL, considering all of it, endorsements, product sales, merch, all the players, all the agents, can we say that this charity, the NFL, is a charity, or is it a business development exercise for a small number of the top 0.001% in this country who own the teams, and for the very highly paid people who are inside the teams? And to me, I don't understand why this is a charity. I don't get it.
Well, I'd go
Here's
as
a
far
question.
as, excuse me, Jason, I'd go as far as to add, what about the universities and these football teams?
Right.
Absolutely.
Same thing.
Well,
Coaches making $5 to
but
$6 million a year, forget
Yeah.
it.
is there a distinction, gentlemen, between a charity and a tax-exempt business association, or is anything that is tax-exempt inherently a charity?
I can't answer that as a lawyer, but just thinking about it in principle, why I don't think there's a portion around the NFL that is losing money. Right? The concession stands are making money, the parking people are making money, the uniform people, the sneaker people, on and on and on. Everybody's making money. So when you look at it that way, you say, why should this collection of enterprises that is making obscene profits and building obscene wealth, why does it need not to pay taxes at a time when we so badly need tax revenue? Do we really believe if we made the NFL a taxable entity that people would stop playing football? Of course they would.
Or watching, or that
Or
it would
watching.
lose money? No, you make a
Right.
very good point, Charles, because while it's understandable that a business association, the operation of it is intended to promote the business itself and that would create more taxpayers, they really need to go back over this stuff. I mean, if instead of announcing spending tons of money hiring 87,000 IRS agents for the criminal investigation department, if any president said, we're going to go back over these tax-exempt business associates, specifically these entertainment things, the National Academy of Television, the NFL, these things that make a ton of money. But if there's a pecking order, something that's actually trying to do charity seems more worthy of tax exemption than these things that maybe when television was invented, it made sense to have something developing the business. But as you say, almost everybody in that industry makes more money than certainly the average income in the United States. Why should a taxpayer help boost that industry?
Right. And the flip side, when you speak to charity experts, as we all have, true charity, people don't give money away for the tax benefit. True charity. They look at it and they say there's a need, and there was a lot of charity prior to the income tax code being adopted in the United States, substantial charity. Yes, there were abuses then, and there'll be abuses always, but true charity is selfless people seeing a need that is not filled either by the private sector or the government sector and say, you know what, I can afford to give this money away. I don't want any personal or familial credit for it. I just want to help this truly vulnerable person who's been aggrieved or afflicted in this way or another way. And that happens every day, every hour, every second in this country and around the world. But instead of having that kind of selfless, charitable work, it's become one of the largest sectors of the American economy with no regulation of any kind, no significant regulation. The FBI is too busy. Who knows what they're doing, but their total budget is only $10 billion, the FBI. And so, when we talk about abuses in the global fund, which is over 100 billion total spending, the FBI in theory is trying to find terrorists, hopefully foreign terrorists, but not branding all the three of us as domestic terrorists. But, they have some serious projects they're doing for out of the 10 billion. How is the residual enough to police the sector? And the answer is it isn't. The IRS and these state governments, they don't have the ability. The state accounting board at Arkansas or even New York doesn't have the ability to truly check what the Clinton Foundation is doing outside the U.S. They're never going to do it.
Charles, the NFL made $17 billion last year. Maybe they could investigate it. Better than the FBI.
Yeah, but you'd probably take the people in the NFL, and I've met a number of people like this. Fortunately, they weren't badly hurt. But take the people who've been there, say, longer than 10 years, gotten hit in the head a whole bunch of times. Sadly, many of them are injured. You could probably take the people who've been most grievously injured out of the NFL, and they would do a better job of finding the fraud in the Clinton Foundation than BKD did and other charities.
Yeah. Well, Bob, I mean, this has been an excellent reveal, but just to clarify, because I think some people might be confused, and when I say that, I'm talking about me. When they sent that letter that said, this is going to be closed upon the payment of money or whatever, so what does that mean? Is it just done, or do you have this complaint? Can we talk about this?
Well, it means it's done and they've settled it, but at the end of the day, the public should have been aware of this. And that would have been enough, in some senses, being a punitive punishment with the public sentiment and opinion, but they didn't publish it. It is now, and it'll hopefully it'll be a stain on Eric Hansen, the former AICPA chairman, and some of the executives of BKD, particularly the Little Rock office. And hopefully it'll lead at some point to where we've got to change the regulatory process of CPAs on high profile cases.
Well, and I think another point is that the Clinton Foundation, in its worst period, the governor of Arkansas was Mike Huckabee. And, you know, the disciplinary apparatus in Arkansas let this slip, not just BKD, but the attorney general, the district attorneys, and the governor let this shit show fly here. And as a guest, I understand why. I mean, the process of putting this foundation up revitalized a city that had been moribund for decades, a portion of the city. It brought new people in, it brought tourist revenue. And I can imagine why the city fathers would say before their personal acts is, this is good for the city. You know, yeah, there are problems, just don't worry about it. It's good for the city. But I think an exercise also has to happen here saying, well, how many of these city fathers profited off the redevelopment? How many of them knew in advance what was going to be bought? How many of them owned the land that was bought to put this thing together? And more to the point, the leading candidate here is for governor, is Mike's daughter, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's the second press secretary, I think, for President Trump. She's, you know, far out in front, I think, to be the next governor. She should be put on the spot. You know, is under her leadership, are we ever going to go back into this sordid history and have, you know, a true accounting of what was spent here and true justice for people who have mysteriously died in Little Rock around this project, including John Glasgow, who died under very suspicious circumstances, knowing most likely the true cost of the Clinton Foundation, and perhaps being so bold as to complain about the differences between the true costs and the financial statements, and dying, it seems, just as Hillary's campaign, such as it was under the microscope in January of 2008, when she wasn't faring well. She raised a bunch of money. She blew it in January 2008. She's flailing around, and this guy, John Glasgow, disappears. So there's a lot to cover here. And maybe we, the people, are going to have to do it. We certainly can't count on Christopher Wray.
Yeah. Charles, didn't we learn something recently about John Glasgow that caused us to maybe change the hypothesis of what happened to him? I forget what that was.
Well, yeah, there are allegations that John may have not been that clean, but whether he was clean or dirty, the fact remains that the general contracting firm, which had the largest contract to the point of any major building in Little Rock, the chairman dies of cancer ostensibly at a young age, and then right after that, John Glasgow dies. And as we say, there's never been an accounting or true legal assessment of what was going on here by objective, empowered people around the world. There never has been. And this, and here we have the high and mighty National Archives, ratting Trump out at Mar-a-Lago because they take, Trump's handling of papers so seriously. But to this day, we don't really know who had custody and control and where they had these papers of the Clinton Foundation. We don't know what's going on with the Obama papers. We know that W. Bush, I think it's 33,000 emails are missing from him at minimum. And this is the history. This, from Bush, H.W. Bush to the present. This is the period where America surrendered to the globalists, where families who are all in for globalism sold nationalists out for nothing, comparatively speaking. And there ought to be an examination of that process looking at these records. The Obamas, had a bit of money, really nothing when they started into politics. Now look at them. Clinton's the same thing. George W. Bush was barely functioning in 1986 when he gave up drinking and ultimately got involved in politics and went to the White House. H.W. Bush, born with a silver foot in his mouth, we know, but he he also made a lot of money in his post-presidency. Is this the way it works? That if you play along with the globalist swamp, you get your Martha's Vineyard mansion, you get your Chappaqua and DC mansions, you get to fly private, you get your sinecure book deals, and nobody asks the kind of tough questions that need to be asked. This before we get to, what's going on with the Biden foundations? How come nobody's looked at that? The various foundations he created before, whatever the foundation will be, it'll probably be some swimming pool in Delaware.
Charles, they're all hanging out with President Anal Schwab. Here's Trump.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Why didn't Trump just tell this guy to go to hell?
He should have. Our good friends in Norway had me on Friday, and it's the broadcast that was out Saturday, and I christened this forum the World Evil Forum, which is what I'm going to call it from now on.
Yeah, that's what it is.
So, Bob, this is your work. Is outstanding and detailed and thorough. It is not the work of a conspiracy theorist. It has been cross-checked and triple-checked. I don't think Hillary Clinton could write the first page of any of your reports herself, let alone put all this stuff together. So my hats off to you.
Yeah, one of the things is we need to give hats off to the investigator as well as the executive director of the Arkansas Accountancy Board. They did give due process. There was a lot of politics probably involved. We don't know the extent of that, but at least it got over the finish line. And that's
good. With more to come.
And so can we discuss what's next, or is that imprudent?
Well, in regards to this, it's up to the public. Maybe we get a congressman run with it, to take it. I've got another one going on in another state right now that it's a headliner. And hopefully if I do enough of these, it'll get the attention of people.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to your question, Jason, is that if the 2022 elections do not result in a change of control of at least one branch of the House or Senate, then maybe nothing happens. If, on the other hand, we see a change in the House, maybe a change in the Senate, then at least there will be a 2-year period where people who care about this can fight for what's right at a time when interest rates will be high and raging, inflation will be high and raging, problems will be all over the place, and we're not going to accept the idea anymore that these knuckleheads at the World Evil Forum and academia and the big national leaders know what's best for us, so we should just STFU. I don't think that's going to be the mood of the country, really, either way. If on the other hand, the Democrats prevail, the crooked wing of the Democratic Party prevails, then it'll be a much tougher fight. If they don't prevail, I believe we'll be able to make some real progress, but it's going to take time.
Well, I hope that's correct, Charles. It's difficult to see how we could break through this, but Bob, we really need to thank you for this incredible work that you've been doing behind the scenes for years, and finally you've been able to come forward today and share it with the Crowdsource the Truth audience. I once again want to encourage people to visit your YouTube channel, the Bob Bishop YouTube channel. You can see all of Bob's visits to the border with George Rodriguez, but just be careful. This one, that's my error. There's an incorrect thumbnail there, but we'll fix that after the show. People should subscribe to Bob Bishop's channel. You can watch the videos that Bob has done on Crowdsource the Truth. You can watch the videos that Bob's done down at the border. Anything else, guys, that we'd like to discuss before we wrap up today's show?
No.
No, that's great. Thanks again, Bob.
Well, and thanks to everyone for your patience through the complicated technical issues of getting the show set up on the road. But as you know, the show must go on. And if you want to support this show, you can do that by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Please become a sponsor. Help keep the show going, even if you're only watching Sunday with Charles or the other free shows on YouTube. Constant ongoing effort by the people who would defend the likes of the Clinton Foundation and other charity grifters to disable our ability to communicate this kind of information to you. So thanks to everybody who makes it possible. And Charles, thanks to you and to Bob.